Hello, my name is Olivia Mattis, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's program. We're going to be following the footsteps of one daughter, tracing the exodus journey of her mother in 1939, 1940, and 1941. Our speaker today is Rebecca Barber, and she will be introduced by today's moderator in a few moments. So today's program is part of our series of Sunday programs on beautiful stories of rescue, resistance, and hope that we have been presenting now for 10 months since the beginning of the COVID period. After today's program, you will get an email listing our upcoming series of events. We have 5 upcoming programs until March 14th, and then we're going to have a little bit of a break, and we're going to start up again in April. So I do encourage you to sign up for our upcoming events when you receive that email later today. Our foundation honors a hero, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, who saved all those lives in 1940, and he paid a very heavy price. And you had the opportunity to watch the film about him called Disobedience, the Sousa Mendes story. And you see what a unique person he was and how much risk he took onto himself so he could save thousands of strangers. And today's program is the story of one such family that was saved. So now it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to my friend and colleague, Robert Jacobitz, who's going to moderate today's program. So Robert, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Olivia. It's great to be here with you, Rebecca, and those who are participating in today's program. Rebecca and I first met in 2018 when she was my guest at a speaking engagement at one of the synagogues in Pinecrest in Florida. I think that was one of the beginnings that you had in making your presentations, and I understand you've made many more. And I'm looking forward to the most recent iteration of your presentation. Rebecca started out as an educator and then became an entrepreneur, and then worked for a little while as a trainer specialist with the NIH and letting people understand how to use the internet as a way to do medical research. And of course, the last few years, she's put her heart and soul in publishing, writing, and translating, and doing all these wonderful things on behalf of her mother's book. So with no further ado, I'd love Rebecca to now begin with her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Steppel Barber. I want to tell you a little bit before I start the actual program, so you know who I am and who my mother was. She and I were very close. The family was Orthodox Jewish faith. Sabbath was observed, and my parents believed very much in a Jewish and secular education. In the later years, I had a business with my mother. She was a jeweler, and we spoke every single day. It is hard to believe when you see and hear this story that I knew absolutely nothing of her background. So Matt, let us begin. I will share with you snippets of a remarkable journey my mother and her family survived. How do I know, you may ask? After her untimely passing at the age of 62 in 1982, I found 2 small diaries in her night table drawer. What I will talk about is the culmination of decades of translation of the diary, world history, research, and traveling to recreate her journey. In her lifetime, I knew my mother as a devout Jewess, assertive, creative, extremely smart, and a self-starter. After I edited and self-published the translated diary in 1996, at Kinko's, I might add, I took no further action for at least a decade. The hundreds of copies I typed, designed, and printed were given away all over the world in honor of my youngest son, Elliot's bar mitzvah. Then it began again with a phone call from halfway around the globe. More about that later. Let's take a few minutes to look at the diary's attributes. We see on this slide a few of the standouts within the diary. The Hebrew symbol, Bet Hey. Bet Hey has two explanations, Be'ezrat Hashem, which means with the help of God, or Baruch Hashem, blessed be God. And that was how she was brought up, and that's how she started her diary. The next is the handwriting. And as you can see from this slide, the left is straight, ramrod, equal ink disbursement, and on the right, probably a year and a half later, she is just all over the place, harried, leaking ink, probably in very much of distress. The unknown words at the top of the page. Well, that took about 3 years when I diligently started. And Guterman and Company is a thread company that has been in business over 150 years. And they wanted nothing to do with my questions. Did my grandfather work for you? Did you give away books? I think there may have been a little fear with that, but let that go for now. The recipes that Leah had in her teenage diary are really something to see. Sauerkraut, süße Apfel, beef stook. I haven't tried them. I'm not Julia Child, but it was interesting to see that my mother took note of different recipes along the way. On the right side, we see an address book, or a page from an address book that was also in the diary. Never in my life did I think that we would ever find out what or who these people are. But hang in there, we're going to. Next, please. Pictured here is a wonderful find, and that is the Steppel residence in Düsseldorf. We see the cover of the public phone book and my grandfather's name, which here is printed as Moritz, which probably was the Germanic version of my grandfather's Polish name, Mojżesz. In the upper left-hand corner, you have to squint a little bit to see a portion of a fabulous synagogue where my grandfather was a sexton, which we also know as Gabbai. This is the family we're thinking of, approximately 1935. My grandmother Ita is far left. Next to her is my mother, Leah, although I never knew her name was Ottalia Leah, and then the two younger children, Henny and Paul or Pincus, and my grandfather with all his names. I knew him as Grandpa Moses. Years later, Leah writes, the greatest calamity began. All Polish Jews had to leave Germany. In the evening of exactly 12 midnight in October of 1938, there was a knock on the door. The police were standing outside, and they ordered my parents to immediately pack all their valuables and come with them. They rudely declared that they would never again see their residence. My parents did not believe the officials and went along as they were with empty hands. At the police station, there were many more Jews of the city. Most came with bag and baggage. At the police station, most came with In short, they were transported in cattle cars to Poland, except those who did not have their Polish passport with them. Luckily, my parents were among the latter, and they were allowed to go home. Everything seemed to be in order again. How wrong they were. You see on the left side of this slide an aerial view. On the right, the same ablaze on November 9th and or 10th in 1938. She writes, "It was the greatest scandal that people had ever lived to see." January 18th, 1939, just barely 19 years old, Leah writes, God decided to punish us Jews by sending us a second Haman. In 1939, Leah refers to the Purim evildoer as the only comparison she had for Hitler. Then she continues, thereupon our life was in constant fear and uneasiness regarding our future. Now we go back to a little bit of a mystery solved. Hildegard Jacobs becomes a very significant and pivotal person in unraveling my family's mysteries. She is the director of the Memorial Center in Düsseldorf, Germany. In 2012, it seems, a woman walks into the center and gives Hildegard the 1996 translated version of the diary. She says that this might be of interest. Hildy finds and calls me and says that the center is being renovated and they want to put the translated diary into their display. She asks if I have any additional information or documents about the Steppels pre-Kristallnacht. What a major surprise. She in turn promises to research Düsseldorf's archives for information on my family. I am overwhelmed by her tenacity and dedication in uncovering family information. I shouldn't be surprised, but I am amazed at the depth of items which have been stored and archived since 1935. As an aside, I have yet to know who dropped off the diary. If it's any of you out there, email me. One of the most shocking mysteries unearthed is a child born to my grandmother in 1929. Leah was 9, the others much younger. Archival information read that, quote, mother and child are debilitated and stayed hospitalized for 12 days. Thereafter, I'm saying, the baby was taken to an institution where she could be properly taken care of. Carolina was born with Down syndrome and a heart defect. I have no idea what the 3 children were told. There is proof of monies paid, visits, and postcards with updates back and forth. My aunt lived to the age of 4. I firmly believe that they never would have fled Germany had she been alive in 1938. One of my favorites. We are looking at a slide of one of Leah's diary entries that show each city and country and how long they stayed in each. Hopefully we'll come back to the slide because there is a lot to see on it. She even marked on the far left, Nacht, Tag, and Monat, which translated from German is night, day, and months. Leah's precision and exactitude followed her throughout her life. In 1996, as you can see on the left, I did my best with a World War II map to show the route the family took. I now know that there were hordes of refugees all going in the same direction. Destination, Portugal. Now, how elegant Leah looks on the streets of Antwerp. I presume on the left that she is looking for a job because her diary states they live in Belgium for 13 months. Research tells me that there were street photographers, and this is probably how this photo came to be. Leah had jobs as a knitter, a translator, and on the right, a mother's helper. The photo there shows where she was. She went to Coxide on the Sea with the family to an apartment that this family owned. During the night of the 9th and from the 9th to the 10th of May, Germany, the dragon, suddenly invaded Belgium, Holland, and Luxembourg. Now we must escape again. And she writes, we did not flee from Germany to live with Hitler in a foreign country. On the same day, she writes, we saw thousands of Jewish refugees fleeing Antwerp. The Belgian soldiers did not even put up a fight against the Germans. The Germans advanced closer and closer. Here, she is traumatized and writes, a camionette, think VW big bus, with 30 people took us away from the invaders. And here comes the dichotomy. I have not enough ink nor paper to describe all the details, yet I know it will not leave my memory so quickly. Now we have a plan. We traveled from one place to the next. So it went until we reached Paris. We remained 3 days until a call came out. We must leave again. We quickly made our way to Bordeaux. There, my 17-year-old brother, Paul, was forcibly conscripted into the French army. Let us stay in Bordeaux and look at our hero. Aristides de Sousa Mendes became the Angel of Bordeaux by disobeying President Salazar Circular 14, which denied safe haven to refugees and specifically to Jews. Sousa Mendes issued thousands of visas during that time, involving 12 days from June 12th to the 23rd. Well, with the help of Olivia Mattis, I found out that the Steppels were definitely there. Leah's visa, found in the red pouch, had been signed on June 20th, 1940. For his act of defiance, Sousa Mendes was severely punished by Salazar, stripped of his diplomatic position, and forbidden from earning a living. Here comes the bad, sad part. He had 15 children who were blacklisted and prevented from attending university. He died nearly forgotten and impoverished. Now we turn to something that has absolutely changed my life. In 2017, Sandy, my husband, and I accepted an invitation to go with the Sousa Mendes Foundation on a journey to freedom, with an itinerary whose goal it was to retrace the steps of refugees, my ancestors, who eventually received visas to enter Portugal. I went, but I had no real expectations of what I would see or gain from this trip. I was wrong again. We arrive in Bordeaux and walk with the group, I barely knew at the time, to a park where a bust of Aristides de Sousa Mendes is honored. As I learn more about my fellow travelers, I am increasingly impressed by the loss that would have occurred had their descendants not received the much needed visa from Sousa Mendes. This is just a snippet, ladies and gentlemen. I am in this picture in the white hat with my husband, Sandy, behind me and Olivia behind him. In front of me is Sousa Mendes's grandson. That's Gerald Mendes. Hi, Gerald. I think you're in the audience. And right to your right is a now very good friend, Marianne Rosenberg. Now, Marianne, whose grandfather, Paul Rosenberg, was a Parisian art impresario, big time, who represented the likes of Picasso and Matisse and Braque and others, and saw his huge collection looted by the Nazis. Think The Train with Burt Lancaster. She has made it her life to try to find as many of the art that was looted and return it to its rightful owners, her family. 17 members of her family were issued visas. To the far left is Lissy Jarvik. Yes, the name is Jarvik, MD, PhD, flanked by her granddaughters. And she was a pioneer in the field of neuropsychogeriatrics. She may have even coined the word Alzheimer's. Dr. Robert Jarvik, whose name also might be sounds familiar, is her nephew, who is widely known as the inventor of the first permanent total artificial heart. And that's just a snippet of the people in this group. Matt, next. We are led to the former Portuguese consulate and see a plaque in white with gold letters in honor of Sousa Mendes. This is where my mother and thousands of others waited in line on this marble staircase to receive a visa to proceed to Portugal. The original marble stairs gave me the chills. I was standing in my mother's footsteps. Leah writes, we arrive in Bordeaux, completely broken and dead tired. We did not know where to go. We were desperate. The men were allowed to stay overnight in the synagogue. The place was anything but hygienic and clean. It was completely impossible for the women to stay there. In the evening, many members came to the synagogue. One of them invited me to stay at her house until we could find lodging. It was her son who liked me. He was very attentive towards me from the first moment he met me. A little love scene here. He said he would even fall out with his family for me. In 1942, I'm informed that this synagogue was a holding area or a jail for Jews waiting for deportation. I'm here in the chapel giving a testimony of the things I'm saying now, and afterwards, before the group, Gerald Mendez took me aside and said that he had calculated the addresses that Leah had in her diary, remember from previous slide, and they were mere minutes away. Well, that did make sense. So off we went with an entourage of travelers, photographer, journalist, and we found all 3 residences within 6 or 7 minutes of the synagogue. And you can see Sandy and I are thrilled, and we are at 5 Rue Bobada in Bordeaux. Indeed, I walked and stood in my mother's footsteps. They proceed on and arrive at Hendaye, dead tired, she writes. After a long wait at the French-Spanish border, we came to Irun, Spain. Again, she continues, this once beautiful, flourishing, and rich land was in shambles. War destroys everything. Why don't foolish people understand that one can only lose? No one wins in war. Immediately upon entering Irun, we saw what terrible devastation had occurred, unquote. As the Steppels rode on trains through Spain, they saw Spaniards lining up at the stops for any scraps of food the refugees might have. And they traverse Spain. There are stops, but this is only a half-hour presentation. So let us go to the border town of Villa Formosa. There she writes, at the border town, it was warm, light, and clean. In the evening, we saw a strange sight. People at a well in the middle of town washing themselves. A short walk at the end of the train station, we are given hard hats, hi Marianne, and construction vests for a preview of the almost completed Frontier of Freedom Museum. This museum, even in construction, made a huge impression on me. And as you can see in the middle slide, there is the cutout of a Jewish star. And the architect explained to us that as people were going to, visitors, were going to come through this long cavernous hallway before they opens up to a much bigger area, there will be a laser beam that will go onto the star and jump back onto either their chest or their arm. And you know what that is all about. We are now at the actual museum. We aren't. The next month it opened, and you can see the president in the center, Marcelo Rebecca de Sousa, with the architect to his right, and the mayor whom we met later, the mayor of Villa Formosa, with him as well. Next slide. Now, this is how it came to be, she writes. The next day, each of us was called to an office and directed where to stay. This is how we came to be in CURIA. Now we traverse Portugal to reach the destination. At the village Pompelosa, we were invited to stay overnight with the station chief's family. Here is where, again, his son fell for me. He later traveled to CURIA to visit me. Soon he fell on my nerves. That happened to my mother a lot during her life, people falling on her nerves. Let us look for a second where she was lucky enough to stay, and that is the Palace Hotel, a famous then and still now spa and resort in CURIA. On the right a colorized picture of my mother and her, she loved hats, but upper left, when the hotel was refurbished, they kept many of the suitcases of the refugees and have them in a big display in the anteroom in the lobby when you first come in. The picture of my mother below with palm trees, well, she describes CURIA as having beautiful palm trees, and this is probably the first time in her life she has ever seen that. Next slide, Matt. Now, lest you think she's only having a good time, in Portugal, Leah's sole purpose is to secure the US entrance visa and then find passage for 5, not just herself, for 5 to enter America. It consumed her. Upper right, you will see, we find Moses's passport, a stamp to Haiti. I guess that was plan B. Thank God, never used. She writes, "Today is my 20th birthday. Who knows where we will be next year on my birthday? Maybe under better conditions. Other people are happy on their birthdays. They do not reflect for a moment what has happened before and what will occur in the future." Again, this is my husband's doing. He remembered on this trip, on this voyage, on this journey, to take pictures that we knew nothing about from a scrapbook that my mother did put together once she was in, as she called it, America. It actually had the name of Monticello on the front of the scrapbook, so it threw me off for a number of years. But here she is on the left, second from the left, partially hidden, is my mother in a car that I have no idea what it is. Maybe someone in the audience will know. And then he rushed me to the front of the hotel to show me exactly where to stand. And boom, I stand in my mother's footsteps. Next. Here's another brilliant one. So Sandy, you can see how old these little postcard size or postage size pictures are. In 1940, and trust me, she has been going back and forth for days because she writes about it, trying to find the visa, going to the American consulate, but she has some downtime also. So here she is sitting at the front of the hotel, and there I am, sitting exactly where my mother sat. Next, Matt. I love this one. Upper left, mischievous 20-year-old Leah climbs up a water tower. And when I first saw this picture, I really had no idea what it was because it was cut off. But here we are at the Palace Hotel, and Sandy once again directs me to the water tower where I posed for a picture because, oh, sure, I would climb up there, but it was blocked off. On the right, she has a day, an afternoon on a little boat ride on the lake at this Palace Hotel. And once again, he finds the exact spot. Looks like the same boat, actually. Next. I love this picture. On the left is Leah, again in the hat, far left, enjoying a morning or an afternoon with friends or refugees, we think, people that were helping her perhaps find the ship, find the visas. And on the right, once again, my husband finds the exact place, we think, of the picnic site. Now, in October of 1940, she writes that I now know that I can only rely on myself in God. She was very spiritual. She referred to God and her lucky star a number of times. And we know, again from research, that people were defrauded of money and people would say that they would help, and then who knows what happened. So she was driven to write this, that she can only rely on herself and God. The US Embassy in Lisbon was a recurring trip from CURIA where Leah stays overnight, she writes, with friends, going up and down the docks looking for passage. This took many, many weeks. This is not an overnight thing. She writes about yet another young man she meets in Lisbon. He eventually claims to take my life unless you marry me. And I'll tell you, she stayed focused. They were loving her, but she was on the move. Leah, in one of her last entries, talks about the Nyasa, but until recently, we knew very little. It is credit to Sandy, who found the manifest for the Nyasa, and voila, here are both my mother and Uncle Paul on the list. His daughters, actually, both daughters are on this Zoom. The small notation says that sister and parents are on another sheet. That was very comforting. When I did ask my mother many times how she came to America, she answered, on a banana boat. On April 26, 1941, the Steppels arrived at a port in Brooklyn, New York, which I never knew about, and a photographer from the New York Daily Mirror picked Leah and Henny to pose for the newspaper. And as you can see them beautifully dressed, how they did that, I don't know. Quite lovely. My mother, again, with a very modern hat for the day. And the caption says, Ottilia LEAH STEPPEL left, 20, and Sister Henny, 15, refugees from Poland. Well, as Olivia Matisse of this foundation said, well, they really weren't from Poland at that point, but Germany, but okay, that's the liberty that they took. They lived in French trains for 10 weeks, a big mystery to me. Would love to know more about that. After one of my presentations, I received this article from a member of the audience. The Portuguese liner Nyasa, this reporter says, was overcrowded, carrying 816 refugees rather than the 400 who traveled on the last transatlantic run. Conditions were abominable, with one bathroom for 200 people. Others were defrauded, as I mentioned before, in Portugal by speculators who exacted money before a ticket was given. However, the reporter writes that the passengers were eternally grateful for their escape from Europe. The Steppels were definitely on board. We were invited to the presidential palace in Lisbon. It really was a thrill. You think you won't be impressed by it, but it was extraordinarily impressive. We were inside. We were in many of the ante rooms along the center. And you can see in this photo, the president, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, no relation to Aristides, in the center, behind the two granddaughters of Lissy Jarvik. We also see Mariana Abrantes, who is a board member. She is far right and to this day still lives in Portugal. And far left, Leah Sills, who is on the board as well of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. Next comes the big thrill. So I caught a few minutes with the president. How did I do it? Well, I'm my mother's daughter. And he is telling me that he believes he has Jewish ancestry. And he looks into my eyes, and the next thing I know, boom, a Kodak moment with where the photographer for the president snapped this picture. Now, from the 1996, let's see if I can get it. From the 1996 volume, I write in the back, my words. The last entry, written in English, was found on a separate slip of paper nestled between the last pages of the second diary. Here it is a beautiful testimony of Leah's strong commitment to living life well and with optimism. The legacy she left her children who are on this Zoom and her grandchildren, whom I hope are on this Zoom, is for all people who cherish human dignity. And what does she write? After rain comes sunshine. After winter, spring. After sorrow, joy. Therefore, you must never be discouraged, but must always hope for happiness. So to say that the journey changed my life is seriously an understatement, because one of the most major things is here is a picture of cousins, the two men on the upper right, who are the sons of Henny. I had not seen them in over 35 years. But when I told them about this Toast to Freedom Gala, they came and showed up. To my right and left are Leslie and Shelley, daughters of Uncle Paul. This is something that never could be repeated in a lifetime, and I am eternally grateful for Sousa Mendes for this. Then she writes, recently, I am spending much time amongst us Jews. Formerly, I thought we were a small, wretched people, and there was reason to hate us. Today, I must change my mind. We are a good-hearted group. We rightfully call ourselves the chosen people. What I see now is the willingness to sacrifice and help each other unselfishly. This, I say, cannot be found anywhere else in the world. Perhaps, prophecy here, in the future, one might write about it and you can read about it yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was wonderful.
I do have an extemporaneous moment to say that where I wrote that I had no expectations for the trip was totally turned around almost by the second day. I don't have enough time to show you all the places that we were able to travel to, that my mother was there conclusively. So this was a snippet of it, and I thank you all for coming on this small journey.
Good. It's a wonderful book. You did a superb presentation.
Thank you.
So there was just on the slide before your email address where people can then email you to find out about purchasing it.
Yes.
And in a conversation with you, I remember you saying is that there are questions as well that can be had in the classroom setting, both in public schools and in Jewish schools. Would you like to elucidate on that, or if you've done it before?
Yeah. Well, as I came to the end of the book, I, in fact, had questions. And the discussions came up in a number of the different talks that I had even before I wrote the book. Can you open up to the back, please? And I decided, well, this could be specifically for perhaps honor students in middle school or history students in a high school. And I wound up being invited to a very well-known high school, a secular school in Boca Raton, and I presented a brief talk and then was horrified to find out that these honor students, 30–40% of them didn't even know what the Holocaust was. So that moved me to include discussion questions about feelings, describe how you would feel if this were you, what attributes do you believe a person like would have to have in order to charge through. And I'm hoping that it's a book club. It's for book clubs, and they can use, as a starter, they can use the questions in the back. I'm also, you can't see it, you can't see, I didn't bring it up before, but my mother was extremely industrious. And one of the things that you should know, and she writes about jewelry and having jewelry and different things. And later on, she became a jewelry designer with a business on 47th Street, which many people know of. And this is one of, sadly, but one of the last pieces that she, where am I, made for me. Can you see this? Beautiful piece. She also made this. She was not so shabby. And she and I were in business for many, many years. So thank you for asking. Anybody that is even thinking, it took us 2 years, I'll be honest, 2 different invitations about going. Oh, look at my friend Marilyn is writing that her mother had her engagement ring reset by Leah. That's how long. There are friends on this Zoom that have known me for a long time. The trip for both myself and Sandy was life-changing, life-altering. So I encourage anybody who even thinks that they may have a descendant who was given a visa to go on this fabulous trip. Of course, 2022, God willing, this damn pandemic. And by the way, you know, we have the pandemic, and I have reread my mother's diary and my book in advance of talking. They had it, we think we have it pretty bad. I'm sitting in a beautiful home in Florida. I'm able to eat. I'm able to talk to friends on Zoom and Facebook. My mother was sleeping under wheelbarrows in farm barns, in an attic, and we think we have it tough. So hang in there, because she is the kind of young lady that can give us all hope for what can be in the future.
Good. Also, just want to let people know is that we have a number of Jewish educators who come on the journey as well, in addition to those whose parents and grandparents were visa recipients. And we have a number of non-Jews as well. It really is a wonderful experience for people to more fully understand who Sousa Mendes was, what he stood by, and unfortunately the consequences of his wonderful actions. And the last thing I just want to say is, you've got that fellow who's behind you every once in a while, Sandy. And I wanted to recognize Sandy because he has been your constant, helper. And he's the guy who, set things up for you. Sandy, good to see you again.
Hi, Robert.
And again,
Nice to see you too.
behind every strong woman is a good man. So there we go.
It's true. I will tell you that other than Marianne Rosenberg, we may have been the only ones who brought our men with us. And it was one of the reasons we became so close, because they both were as devoted as could be. And I will tell you that the countryside that we saw, we were in Salamanca, we were all over Portugal, Spain, and of course we started in Bordeaux. So it is a delightful and very awe-inspiring trip.
Right, and when you have the chance, those of you in the audience, you go onto the Sousa Mendes website and you will see the map. That is the journey on the road to freedom. Yes. Again, we invite everybody, as they say, God willing, in 2022, we can all go on this journey again. Thank you. It was a wonderful, wonderful discussion. Thank you again, Rebecca.
Thank you.
So I'm going to take the floor back just to tell you a little bit about upcoming programs, and then we're going to get to your questions in the chat box. So I do encourage people to keep adding questions. There are quite a few questions that have already accumulated. Then after the Q&A, we'll have final thoughts from Rebecca and from Robert. But right now, let me tell you about the next 5 weeks of programs. So next week is Valentine's Day, and for that program, we've chosen a theme called Resistance of the Heart. And that is a program telling the story of one particular resistance action that took place in Berlin in February and March of 1943. This is an action where there were the last people in Berlin, the last Jews in Berlin to be apprehended by the Nazis were those who were married to non-Jews. And that's what this story is about. These were intermarried couples where the husbands, the Jewish husbands, were picked up in February of 1943. Then their non-Jewish wives, who may have converted to Judaism, but in the eyes of the Nazis, they were still Aryan, banded together and created this resistance action called the Rosenstrasse protest that's little known today. But that's going to be the subject of next week's program. And it's fascinating, fascinating story. The following week, we are focusing on a Hungarian Holocaust survivor whose name you all know. His name is George Soros, and he's been involved in many causes, and he's very controversial. But his film has just come out. It's a biography that was done on him by Jesse Dylan, who's the son of the singer Bob Dylan. And it's a fascinating film, and I encourage you to sign up. Afterwards, we're showing another film. It's called Nobody Wants Us. That's the story of a ship called the SS Kwanzaa that was filled with Jewish passengers who had been rescued by Aristides de Sousa Mendes, which is why the ship was, why these passengers were in Portugal in the first place, to board that ship. But then things went wrong and the ship was not able to land. You've all heard of the St. Louis. Well, this is a very similar story that ultimately does have a happy ending, unlike that of the St. Louis. And the reason it has a happy ending is thanks to Eleanor Roosevelt, who personally rescued the passengers on that ship. So this is a slice of American history you may not know about. And it's a fascinating story. We'll have the filmmaker and we'll have the world's expert on Eleanor Roosevelt. That's coming up in 3 weeks' time on February 28th. Then the following week on March 7th, we have a program called Bulgarian Miracle. You may not know that in Bulgaria, not a single Jew perished in the Holocaust. The entire Jewish population was saved. And there's a film telling that story. And again, we're going to have the filmmaker and experts on the subject. Then on March 14th, we'll have our final installment for this series. After which we'll take a break for several weeks. So March 14th, we're showing a film called Dear Freddie, and that's focusing on a figure who actually died in the Holocaust. But before he died, he was a hero, and his name was Freddie Hirsch. He was a sportsman and a youth leader and a fascinating personality. And there's this beautiful film about him called Dear Freddie. So you'll be able to sign up for any or all of those programs after today's program when you get the email. Now let's turn to your questions in the chat box. Let's turn to the questions now. So there's a little bit of confusion about the family. Was your family, Rebecca, Polish, but they were living in Düsseldorf? Where in Poland were they from? Can you explain a little bit about why they were in Germany?
I can. My grandmother and grandfather lived in Lodz, Poland, and the children, my mother was definitely born there, and she writes actually in the diary that until the age of 7, so Paul was probably a 2-year-old child. They lived in Poland, and then for more opportunity, they went over the border to Düsseldorf. And that was in 1927.
Okay, and people want to know what happened to your Uncle Paul. So he was conscripted, and then what happened?
And in one of the diary entries, of course, I would also like more information. He was very clever, as my mother, and he was young, 18 years old. He may have been saying he was conscripted into the army to actually do battle may have been an overstatement. He was conscripted probably to do labor or something like that, and he escaped. And he showed up, and they found him, and then they left. So and neither of my cousins, I believe, know what happened with that either. So it's a little bit of a mystery.
So then there are a couple of general questions, one about Sousa Mendes, one about Lisbon, Portugal. So Robert can feel free to chime in as well. The question is, were there other ports that refugees could go through to leave Europe besides through Lisbon, Portugal?
I actually don't know, because I have been concentrating. There's someone who arrived in USA. I don't know, but I'm guessing that Porto had a port, but Lisbon was the big one, and it had a US embassy. so people were drawn to it? That's a very good question. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the only answer I would have is because Sousa Mendes was the sole consul general in Bordeaux for people to get to Portugal. I would expect they just all essentially knew where the trail led for them to be able to embarkate from
Well,
France and other countries.
right. Also, Portugal was one of only 5 neutral countries in World War II.
Right.
And so the
Right.
countries that were occupied, their ports were no
Right.
longer open to.
So let me answer a question that just popped up in front of my eyes, and perhaps the attendee came on late. When exactly did your mother come to the United States? We know exactly from that New York Daily Mirror article, that picture, that she came April 27th, I have to always repeat it, 41. So she was just 21 years old in December.
So there's a question about your mother's recipes. And so somebody wants to see the recipes. So my answer to that is that today's program is recorded. You will be able to view the program on our YouTube channel, and you can pause on that recipe page and make those recipes. And maybe there are more recipes, Rebecca, you'd like
Yes,
us
yes,
to
there are.
make
And
available?
in the actual book, I believe that I have had them, oh, here they are, that I have had them translated. Where are we? Here, recipes. And oops, I'm not on the main. They are there because it is very, very interesting. I can also say that my uncle Paul, who came, of course, to America. Came to America with the family, turned around almost immediately, joined the army, and went back to fight the Germans. So that is, now it says, why did Rebecca not know any of her mother's story prior to finding the diary? I believe that that is an age-old question. I'm trying to think. There are many of us where our parents tried to either protect us, where they were so traumatized, they didn't want to bring us up that way. They didn't let, although I was very protected, my mother did give me freedoms, but not with information. Never, never. I will tell you that when I was a teenager, and let's say I was a little messy in my room, or I wasn't finished my homework, my mother would come in her perfect English, but with an accent, and say, Rebecca, how do you expect to fight the partisans in the forest if you can't even clean up your room? At the time, I didn't make much of it, but this is where it is. Oh, she's writing. That's how it was. Never told me a word, not even on her deathbed, which I was quite near. And that's the way she took it to her grave. Someone said that it only says Kindle on thank you for looking it up already, on Amazon. I got sort of messed up with the publisher. I'm very lucky to have a number of books still here. You can email me, and I will tell you that I was not motivated by money. The book, I took it from my upbringing, is high, $18, and shipping and handling. So to life, as they say. The name of my book is In My Mother's Footsteps. And it's available, where is it? From me, An Odyssey of Faith and Courage, my memoir.
Wonderful.
So you just write to me, and my wonderful husband will pack and ship for sure.
So Rebecca, are those your final thoughts, or do you have anything further you'd like to share with our audience?
I believe, though, because the questions are very telling, I believe that, oh, someone just ordered the book. Thank you. I believe that this is the end. They want my email address, Olivia. This is the end. The saga is not over. I have people who think this should be a movie. I am hoping for the end of COVID, or where we feel much more comfortable for me to go back on. Oh, here, look. back on the road with the story. Matthew is just posting my email, and Dan, would you say that, put that up again? I have 2 long lost relatives who found me, and that's through the internet, where our grandfathers were, Dan, cousins? And he writes that on there. So I think that's it. And I encourage anyone who is interested in history, in a wonderful trip, and what a mom you had. You are so right, Linda. This is Shelley. You must buy the book. This is my cousin. I have many copies that I share with family and friends. That was Paul's daughter. So I have my shills, Olivia, but this is great. Thank you very much.
Hey, Robert, what would you like to say?
Well, it's like, all I can say is that with Rebecca, we're all mishpucha, we're all family, and we share, you know, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experience that you had the tenacity, the interest, and the koyach, and the strength to do it. So again, you have a fan, you have an audience out there who love you, we all do, and keep up the good work, Rebecca. Keep up the good work.
And I believe my email will be on the website, but again, that was not my intention. But let's clear out the guest room of any of the remaining books.
Right.
Great. So in that email that you'll receive today, aside from information about the upcoming programs, there will be also information about the trip. We are taking advance registrations, although no deposits, please. So I do encourage you, if you are interested, to fill out the registration form, but please don't pay the deposit, because we really don't know when the trip will be. It is planned for 2022, but obviously COVID permitting, so we're going to play it by ear.
And Olivia, just one more thing. People still have the opportunity of seeing the movie. How many days after today's program?
So the movie is available. Well, it's available. So you have that link, and it continues to be available. It's on our website, and you can spread the link. Please do. So great.
Well,
so
this was a great experience. You have a wonderful team. I thank Matt. I guess I'll call him my producer and director. And just a pleasure to be able to share this, again, a snippet of my mother's story.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And thank you, Robert. And thanks to the audience.
Yes, thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Matt.
We'll see you all next week. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.